The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets about what matters most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Drew Miller is a singer-songwriter in Nashville. His songs have a solidity and depth of insight that hardly seem possible for a writer who's still in his mid-20s, but apparently it is possible. In the fall and winter of 2019, he's releasing 2 companion EPs called Consolation and Desolation. As the Rabbit Room's content developer, Drew keeps the pipeline of great content flowing. He's also the producer of this podcast and others in the Rabbit Room Podcast Network. I'm very glad to have him on this side of the glass. All right, Drew Miller, so glad to have you on this side of the glass in The Habit.
I'm glad to be on this side of the glass.
Yes, you are the producer of the Habit Podcast, and that's not what we're not here necessarily to talk about your role as producer of the Habit Podcast, because I want to talk about this amazing project that you've been putting out, that you are putting out in the fall and winter of 2019.
Correct. Yeah.
Desolation and Consolation,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll get to that in a minute. But as I said, you are the producer of this podcast. Now you're on this side of the glass. And one of the peculiarities of our process is that I can't even hear you. Like, we don't have a talkback system. You have to make hand motions from the other side of the glass. So we would do this in hand motions, except I'm afraid the audience couldn't hear it very well if you were just doing it.
Yeah, we've actually become so fluent in hand motions that I'm afraid that it's a little bit more difficult for us to just speak.
That's right.
At this point, after all.
So what are your reflections on, I mean, having been listened to this many writers talking about their work, 20-something now?
I mean, for one thing, editing conversations gives me like a really close-up perspective of the conversations themselves. It's almost like close reading a book, but it's like close listening, because I'm trying to find any way to make the conversations more compact, which, due to your genius and brilliance, I haven't really had to do very much, because they're already very concise conversations. And that is one thing is that I've noticed, I mean, it's almost down to a science, like in the best way, that like, even though in terms of content, each conversation goes in a completely different place, in terms of the format, like, it is just, I can I can hear where it's going, and it has a very like every single one of your interviews has the same consistent like momentum.
Really?
Yeah, it feels like it's all going, and I don't know if I have words for exactly like the destination of that, but it's really cool because I think I've gotten to know the way that you do this well enough just through listening.
Yeah, that's funny.
It's like, oh, I bet he's gonna, go here or something. But I think in terms of subject matter, it's just really cool to really hear firsthand that in talking about writing, you're talking about everything.
Yeah, I know.
Because writing is a way of engaging with everything by nature. So it's just broad.
Yeah.
And that breadth is really cool.
Yeah, writing problems, they're never just writing problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
As we've said before.
I forget which one that you said that in, but
yeah,
I remember hearing you say that.
And it's remarkable to me to sort of sit in this room and talk to people who have, I mean, a lot of these people are actually friends with each other and they have a lot in common, and yet the sort of the variety with which people think about this work is pretty remarkable.
It's pretty staggering.
Yeah. It certainly has given me reason to be thankful for the relationships in my life and the friendships and just understand the extent to which friendship is a force of creativity.
Man, yeah.
Not that everybody who's ever been through this this podcast has been a close friend, but a lot of them are.
Yeah, and then they're like friends with each other too, even if they're not close friends with you.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, the solitary artist is not. It's not a thing. It's just like, let's just get that myth busted.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay, but what I really wanted to talk about in this conversation is your record. Or would we call this a record? Is that
yeah?
Okay.
You can call it a record.
Desolation and Consolation. Mm-hmm. So over the course of the fall and the winter of 2019, you're releasing this album as one song at a time. What's the exact schedule? How's that schedule work?
To be precise, Into the Darkness is the first song from Desolation, and it releases September 6th. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of the Desolation EP, which will be that song plus 3 more, releases in October, the first Friday of October. Then I'm going to do this very same thing with Consolation. So the first song from Consolation will be the first Friday of November, and then the rest of the Consolation EP is the first Friday in December.
Okay. Sorry, I had that all along. I was getting mixed up.
It's just, the way that you got to do it these days.
Yeah.
Roll it out slow. Right.
This is just now the way, it really is the way people do it these days?
It's my best guess at what will work the best.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. So Desolation in October, Consolation in November and December. Mm-hmm. I was looking at a post that you wrote in the Rabbit Room when the Into the Darkness released, and you said you'd been noticing that all the songs you were writing were either about desolation or consolation, and you decided to sort of treat that as the theme of this album.
Yes.
Were you making a broad statement that everything you've ever written or everything that anybody writes is about desolation or consolation? Or are you saying just those particular?
I'll choose the safe answer and say no. Okay. I was saying that the songs in the season of writing that I have been in for the last year and a half were desolation or consolation songs. Yeah.
Maybe it would be helpful to provide some definitions of those.
Yeah.
Are you using those words in any way that is different from how we would normally use them? Or
well, that's the thing about those words is that they are very evocative, I think, by nature, and they're also not super common. We don't just drop, well, how was your morning? Well, it was a morning of desolation. I'm like, whoa! If somebody said that to you, you would stop everything you're doing and kind of look at them weird. But I first came across those words used together as there's this one of the Ignatian spiritual practices is discerning whether you are in a season or a state of desolation or of consolation.
And those are the only two choices?
I mean, I think so.
Yeah, okay.
In that particular, discipline. And I mean, I think it's a pretty broad thing. It's just those words give you a start at kind of naming what space you're in emotionally and spiritually and all that good stuff. And there are several, like, there's sort of rules almost, I think, that are lined out
In the Ignatian practice?
in the Ignatian practice of like one that I found the most interesting was don't make major life decisions if you know that you are in a state of desolation.
Huh.
Because, like, I don't know, I guess, like, you have rash feelings of maybe rash negative feelings that you should probably not act on if you are in a state of desolation.
At New College Franklin, Greg Wilbur, the dean there, he, after Christmas every year, he tells the students, don't make any decisions in February.
Yeah.
Things
cold
aren't
and rainy.
things aren't as bad as you think they are
Yep.
in February.
It's that stretch of the semester that, like, there's no end in sight. And
Yeah,
it's
you
just,
think you want to quit?
if there's ever a desolate season, it's
Yeah, right.
January and February.
Yeah.
Right.
And so we still. I mean, I was asking about definitions, and I didn't give you a chance to define desolation. So
Yeah,
what
sure.
do you mean when you say desolation?
So where that led me was, and when I kind of go down that path of asking what it means, I picture a ghost town.
Mm-hmm.
I think of a place, and it's usually a place. That's the interesting thing. I think it's usually used as an adjective, desolate, to describe a landscape. Like,
Yeah.
that's the most common way that we're going to hear that word these days. And when we say something is desolate, or a ghost town is desolate, we're saying that it's a place that ought to be full of people, and it ought to be cultivated and
Okay.
tended to. And there's a sense that that's correct, but those things aren't happening. So it's a place where there should be life, but there's emptiness. And one thing that I find really interesting about that concept is that we attach negative emotions to that, but that's not part of the word desolate or desolation itself. Like, it doesn't mean sad. It doesn't mean despair. It just means absence, empty,
Yeah.
And so that almost makes it more haunting. It's just like, no, it's just nothing. And so I think that is the path that I start to go down, and looking for the places in today's world and current events that feel desolate, that feel like places where there ought to be cultivation, but there's a lack, there's an absence. Yeah. So.
And then does consolation mean anything besides just being comforted?
I mean, of course it does.
Okay.
So, if desolation is a place where there should be presence,
Yeah.
but there's absence, or there is the absence is the result of a presence that has fled somewhere, then I think the inverse of that would be, in consolation, it's an absence that has been filled. So there is this motion from loss and emptiness towards fullness. So it's very wrapped up in desolation. You can't define either of those without the other. So consolation isn't just happiness, because, I mean, to be consoled, you have to have walked through some measure of loss or grief to need consolation.
Yeah.
So yeah, those two kind of work off each other.
So how do, in terms of the creative process, and if you haven't been done thinking about this, that's fine. We can move on. But I have a feeling you probably have thought about the how is creating out of a place of desolation different from creating out of a place of consolation?
Oh man,
Or do you have to be in one or the other in order to create?
I think this gets at the question of sequence. That's interesting to me, because it wasn't that I decided I'm going to write a desolation song today because I want to.
Yeah, right.
And then, like I was writing songs just because I was writing songs. And as I said, like I looked back after maybe a year or so of a season of a lot of writing and realized once I kind of had this language from this Ignatian spiritual practice that I'd learned about, it's like, oh, wait a second, those words, like I can apply them and it fits like too well, really well.
Wow.
And so I think that gets towards an answer to your question that is more like, well, maybe the answer itself is another question. It's can you set out with some kind of goal in mind? Like, can I go into something with a concept and just write according to that concept? Does that work, or am I forcing it? Versus, what comes first? Or do I write a song and then later realize what to name it? And how to conceptualize what it's addressing. So there's a little bit of both for me. I realized that I was doing that, and then I said, okay, let's lean into it. And now that I know I have a few of each, I'm going to try to write out of a place of those things.
So in the Ignatian practice of saying, of answering the question, am I in a place of desolation or in a place of consolation? I wonder if there's any way. I haven't done much thinking about desolation and consolation, so I'm coming to you as the expert here. Is there any benefit or help, or is it a helpful practice to say, building off that Ignatian practice, question one, am I in a place of desolation or consolation? Once I've answered that question, does that affect in any way what I do next in terms of what I'm going to make today?
Oh, man. Well, I guess that's not how it happened for me. So I don't really know. You know?
Okay.
I'm sure there's an answer to that question somewhere, but for me, I kind of went into it more as, I guess, like an aesthetic, and just it was less like I wake up in the morning and ask like where I am personally, and more a tool, almost like a proactive. And I think that this is interesting. This is kind of like what writing is for and what songwriting is for, at least for me, is it's like a proactive tool to make sense of things before they happen.
Yeah.
So
sure.
And I guess some of it might be like, I'm both like really tired of the Enneagram and find it useful enough to mention at this point, but I'm an Enneagram 5, which means that like I generally approach things from a distance to begin with. Like I want to have the full picture, and I want to have an objective perspective. So my instinct isn't to wake up and go straight to the subjective question of like, how am I doing? That would be maybe more of an Enneagram 4 route to go. But for me, it's like, ooh, the concept of desolation, fascinating. Let's write some songs. And then once my emotions catch up to me and I realize, oh, wow, I'm feeling pretty desolate, like I have some songs to sing. You know what I mean? So.
Okay, I want to return to the idea that you offered earlier, and we kind of, skipped right past it, but it was actually a really interesting idea, and that is, even though we attach emotional connotations to the word desolate, it just means empty. And empty... well, play that out a little bit. I mean, what difference does that make for you to realize that emptiness is just emptiness? It doesn't necessarily mean sadness.
Well, for one thing, in articulating a sense of sheer absence, I think you're doing a greater emotional favor to your listener than trying to articulate some heavy emotion itself, if that makes sense. Because you want your listener to attach emotion of their own to what you are delivering to them. Okay. So I think even if the goal is to arrive at a place of deep emotion, the best way to get there is not to try to express deep emotion.
Yes.
It is to describe something that of itself elicits deep emotion.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so I think probably a good example of that is a song from Desolation called Death of a Dream. It's probably, I think it was the one that I realized after I'd realized that I was writing Desolation songs. I was like, all right, well, let's lean into this. Let's get really desolate, right? And you can tell, I think it's the most desolate song. Like there isn't a trace of hope exactly until the end at least. And it is not talking about sadness or despair. It's talking about a sense of it's talking about an absence where there should be a presence. Yeah. And in like the largest degree possible, which is like addressing God. Are you here or not? And that, like, you can talk about that and immediately there's emotion that's there.
Yeah. When you speak directly about emotion, your chances of eliciting that particular emotion are really slim. And so even in the case of sadness, if you speak directly about sadness, what your almost best case scenario is to elicit pity, not sadness.
Oh, man.
I think that's a really
wisdom.
Well, thank you.
Yes, I'm going to take that with me.
Sure.
Oh yeah.
That was free.
Thank you.
After all you've done for me, you can have that.
Oh man, it's all the payment I need.
It's and as I said, that's best case. You know, you may, when you start talking about emotion, your listener, your reader, is in a position to adjudicate how well you're talking about emotion. And if you're doing a good job of it, as I said, sadness, okay, I can feel pity. Yeah. Or maybe I think, oh, maybe I roll my eyes or whatever. Yeah. But if all you're doing is presenting the stimuli that generate sadness, you've got a chance of generating sadness in the reader.
Right, yeah.
And not just pity. Yeah. And you still might get it wrong. And you still are running a risk. It's a risk that's well worth taking, but you're running the risk that your listener or reader is not going to feel what you hoped they would feel.
Yeah. Oh, man.
But if they do feel it, they're going to feel it more effectively than talking about the emotion directly.
Oh, man. Yeah. I mean, it's saying, here, this makes me sad. And I think there's truth to this making me sad. Does it make you sad?
Yeah.
And, like I have experienced firsthand playing a song that it addresses something that makes me sad, and the person listening is like, it doesn't make me as sad as it makes you. Yeah. And that's like
which
well,
is
now
also
I'm more
what
sad.
I know. Right. But that's also what happens in the rest of life.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
yeah, you can't expect everyone to match your exact reactions to. That's just immature.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
One of the assignments I like to give my, or that I do give, also I like to give, but more to the point I do give to my online students is write about a highly emotional scene, probably nonfiction, without using any emotional language. Just tell me what happened.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing how emotional those things can be without the first mention of what's going on inside a person.
Yeah.
Although I did get one person who, it's true that they didn't use any emotional language, or they didn't use any sort of internal language in describing a sad person, but they spent the whole time describing that person with their shoulders slumped and looking down and sighing and stuff like that, which also doesn't elicit emotion. Again, best case scenario may be pity, but instead of depicting what made that person sad, they just showed me a sad person.
Their reaction
which doesn't quite work either. So.
Yeah.
Anyway,
that's fascinating.
I had, this was a live seminar where I had some people in a room. One of whom was I think she was a accounting professor, like some field that was famous for being unemotional.
Sure.
And she was just a really neat woman. She's like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I just heard about it and I thought I'd come because I'd never done anything like this. And when she did her scene where she was supposed to depict an emotional scene without emotional language, she told a story about taking her dog to go get put to sleep.
Oh.
And on the way to the veterinarian, she went through the drive-thru at McDonald's and bought him 2 packages of chicken McNuggets to eat.
No way.
For his last meal.
supper. Yeah.
And people were just bawling, and she would just look around like, "What just happened?" I mean, I didn't know I could do this, and anyway.
Well, that's the ultimate. Like, if you're describing a dog,
yeah.
that is dying. You're going like,
Yeah, right.
It's almost like the cheat. Like you
It
can
is a little
get
cheaty.
past all the rules because you're talking about a dog.
That's right.
Which is true.
All right, so desolation, emptiness, specifically emptiness in a place that should be full.
Yeah.
Consolation is a return.
Yeah.
A place that used to be empty is now full again.
Yeah. Totally.
You got anything else to say about that?
No. I think even just as you're talking, I think this will be a term familiar to probably a lot of listeners who like Tolkien, but eucatastrophe is super related to the idea of consolation, in my mind, at least. It's this unexpected grace that the surprise of it is related to how deep the absence, the former absence is.
Yeah.
And I mean, there is nothing that compares to, especially in a story, like an epic story like Lord of the Rings, you know, to the moment when tragedy is reversed. If it's done well.
Yeah, right.
You know, it can't just be, you know, nonsensical, you know, but man, like it's nothing elicits an emotional response for me personally. Like my wife, Kelsey, and I just finished reading through the Harry Potter series. It was our second time both, and we were reading it out loud to each other. And for both of us, the first time that we read it, we were young enough that like can't really remember all the details. And I mean, like, it's impossible to read those last chapters of the Deathly Hallows without that eucatastrophe feeling coming in, swooping in, and the consolation of, at death's greatest moment, when the Death Eaters are triumphant and they're mocking all of the Dumbledore's army, right? And they're saying, "We have won," and Hagrid is carrying Harry, who is not dead, but has not revealed that he's not dead. Like that, it gives me shivers just like talking about it, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You're gonna need to post a spoiler alert on the on this episode if you're gonna be.
Oh, come on. Harry Potter's old news. There's no risk. We've all read it by now.
Well, okay. By the way, I'm assuming that etymologically these two words are connected, right? I mean, did you look it up?
I mean, I think so.
You would think so, but
Right? Yeah.
you didn't look it up?
Well, now I'm feeling some amount of shame for not looking it up. I've done enough, like,
I mean, you're speaking very
thinking.
confidently about
Oh,
what the-
yes. In fact, I coined the term consolation. No, I mean, I know that they both are verbs, right? Like at root, console versus desolate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know if they're etymologically related beyond that.
Some of they would have to be, but
It feels like it.
Yeah.
It feels like they go together.
yeah, right. One thing I was thinking about as you were talking about desolation being just a thing, not necessarily doesn't have to be
Yeah.
sad. One thing that you may have heard Andy Osinga say before is how important it is. One reason it's important to write every day is because if you don't, you just write when you're sad.
Yeah. Yeah.
You write to console yourself, I guess.
Yeah. Don't write songs only at night.
Yeah,
When you're
right.
sad.
Yeah.
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 So, at the risk of belaboring the question, is desolation a source of creativity, or is creativity a way to combat desolation? Or, I mean, and I just act like that's a either or question. There may
Yeah.
be 50 things in between.
For me, I think my answer is more the second. I think
combating
creative. Yeah, like how is it that you phrased?
I think I said is that emptiness a source of creativity, or is creativity, does it elicit creativity insofar as creativity is a way to combat it?
I think it's more the second. And I think what I want to say is that, like, I actually feel a little, and maybe it's partially like the sort of detachment that I just kind of like have in general as a person, but like I don't necessarily do the like writing only when I'm sad thing to begin with. I typically, like, if I feel sad and miserable, I hate everything that I write. Like, those are the worst times to write for me. And like maybe I want to write if I'm feeling sad, but it's not like a healthy wanting to write. It's like I just need to like see my sad face reflected to me in a song, like in a mirror. And that's not usually going to get you the good stuff. And so I generally write when I feel inspired to write. And that is usually more of a happy feeling, more of a consoling feeling. And it almost gives you the strength to, from that place, engage with the emptiness that you feel at other times. And from a place of greater perspective and consolation, you can say, hey, I'm going to talk about this absence and this loss because I have the tools to do that. I'm not like on the ground writhing.
Right.
Yeah.
A recurring theme in all these conversations on the Habit Podcast is the idea that the writer is telling a truer story than what the world is telling. And so I think in the case of Desolation, where the things that are supposed to fill a space have fled, or at the very least appear to have fled.
Yeah.
You're telling, oh no, this isn't the final story. There's something truer than this, and that's I think that's an important part of the writer's role in the world. Is I'd never thought of it in terms of desolation and consolation before, but I think your categories are really helpful to say it in a time of desolation. The writer brings consolation and says, no, this is how, in spite of the way things appear, here's the way things really are.
Yeah.
But as you say, it may be that you're only it's a lot easier to tell that story when you're in a place of consolation yourself.
Yeah. And I think the opposite can be true too, especially, like, of course, there's a final consolation that wraps it all up in one beautiful ending. And we are all anticipating that. But especially in a culture that is so eager to soothe any sense of pain with false consolation in all kinds of forms, I think the peculiarity of our encounter today with desolation is that it's through the lens of comfort and like false comfort and distance. And there's something so haunting and creepy about hearing terrible things happening in the world from the comfort of your air-conditioned life, And so in the presence of false consolation, I think addressing the true desolation that is here also tempers that false consolation. Like, this isn't it. Like, we're not made to settle for this sort of cheap sense of ease and like prosperity.
Especially if comfort is the absence of hurt.
Yeah.
Right? There are lots of ways to get rid of hurt.
Yes.
And the huge majority of them are not healthy.
Right.
And so now we're talking about things that go way beyond writing.
Comfort that reduces awareness and desensitizes is unhealthy.
Yeah.
Comfort that makes us more sensitive to both the depths of joy and the depths of pain
Okay.
are help.
So
helping.
yes, and
Yeah.
so we are now. I'm finding another really useful, a really good use of your distinction between, the desolation consolation thing, and then distinguishing consolation from comfort, because
Sure.
comfort, of course, Scripture talks about comfort to you, my people, but
Yeah.
but consolation is that subset of comfort that says we're feeling better because things are restored.
Yes.
Yeah. Things that have
true
been
peace, true reconciliation,
Yeah.
and
shalom.
yeah,
Right?
shalom. Absolutely. That's
and prospering, and what's that term that's on the tip of my tongue? Flourishing.
flourishing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Good Old Testament word.
That's right. Yeah. And so I think the creative act or creative acts lead us toward flourishing, not just comfort.
Absolutely. And that is harder to do. I think it's harder to write a sincerely comforting and happy song than it is to write a sincerely sad song. It's harder to articulate. I mean, I think it's harder for us to believe peace and consolation when it's handed to us. And so it's almost like we have more watchful dragons, or like more inner critics that are like, if I'm trying to listen to something that is supposed to be giving me some like true consolation in life, I'm going to be more resistant to it because I'm skeptical. Like,
Yeah.
really? Like, is this really,
Yeah.
is this true?
Yeah.
And and I mean, I think the mark of a really good writer is the ability to describe that like deep, true peace in a way that actually is really, really potent and resonates as true.
I heard an album recently from a performer who, I would say, has a history of deep and not always super happy songs, and then this is a really happy album,
Yeah.
and I felt a little let down, not because I disagreed with anything
Yeah.
in the album, but just
You
it
want to
felt a
name
little
any
I
names?
don't
or
think
you
so.
wanna-
Yeah, I don't
Okay,
think so.
yeah. Cool.
It may be that I'll listen to it more and decide I was wrong. I hope so.
I have theories, but I'll ask you later.
Yeah. and so yeah, it
That's hard.
didn't feel like what you're calling consolation.
I've had that experience too. I think the opposite of that experience, well, I mean, like the opposite, but like when I'm describing, like just now when I was describing this sincere consolation, to me, like the gold standard of that is the song "Don't You Want to Thank Someone."
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, like
Yeah.
if there has ever been a song that actually throws into focus both the sense of loss and the inevitability of filling that loss.
Yeah.
Like,
That's
yeah.
an Andrew Peterson song.
That's an Andrew Peterson song. Yep. And if I'm trying to be consoling, then like I'm aiming there. you
yeah.
know?
It's a good one.
So, yeah.
All right. I'm going to have to give you the final question.
All right. I'm ready.
You probably know what the final question is.
I don't know. I mean,
You've not been paying attention if you don't know what this question is going to be. Who are the writers who make you want to write, Drew?
I think most recently, there's been an album that came out, I think it was a week ago, called Who Are You Now by Madison Cunningham.
Okay.
It's incredible.
Huh.
It's so good. And she is just so smart. She's so clever.
Okay.
I think I love the way that she delivers lines, both musical phrases and like lyrical phrases. Somehow, like the tone and the delivery, she's really, really good at getting something across that's not just contained in like the literal meaning of the words, if that makes sense. It's like a huge gift, and it's excellent. It makes me want to write. I think also songwriter-wise, Sarah Groves, just the greatest example. Like if somebody were to ask me who like wanted to just start writing songs for the first time, like who should I listen to for like the fundamentals of like, this is how you should write a song, like follow this blueprint, I would point them towards Floodplain. by Sarah Groves. That
That's
whole
a great record.
It is just through and through, just nails every single,
Yeah.
sticks the landing, every single line,
Yeah.
every melody. So,
All right.
yeah.
Well, Drew, thank you for being here. I know you're here
Thanks
anyway.
for having me. Oh yeah, always here.
But
Yeah.
I'm really glad that the audience of the Habit gets to hear you on this side of the glass.
Well, I love being here.
All right.
Thanks for talking with me.
Let's talk soon.
All right.
I had looked up the etymology of desolation while you were talking, but I didn't.
The Rabbit Room has partnered with Lipscomb University to make this podcast possible. Lipscomb has graciously given us access to their recording studio and the Center for Entertainment and Arts building. We're so grateful for their sponsorship, their encouragement, and the good work they do in Nashville. Special shout out as well to the Arcadian Wild for allowing us to use their delightful song Finch in the Pantry as part of this podcast. Check out their album of the same name for more excellent music.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
This podcast was produced by The Rabbit Room, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to fostering Christ-centered community and spiritual formation through music, story, and art. All our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.